I'm going to clear up for you today all the confusion that's been going around about these Abrams tanks. You've been hearing about them for quite a long time, and some people say, oh, they're going to be game changers and they're going to turn the war around. And other people say, well, no, it's not that much. And you've heard me say, look, these are really good tanks. I fought in a tank unit in Desert Storm, and I was the second in command of an armored cav squadron with M1 tanks in the mid-2000s in the 1st Armored Division. So when I tell you that they're not going to change the term of the battle, that they're not going to be a game changer in war, I want you to understand why. The reason there's confusion is because there are other authoritative voices out there that seem to say the direct opposite. And in fact, there was a certain former vice admiral from the United Kingdom that said this.
Where they'll play the most role is when they're breaking through that the Russian defenses, because they'll be able to lead the rush to the coast. And that's where, to cut off the land bridge, that's where these tanks could be invaluable.
Look, that was said in September. And that was after it was very clear that the Ukraine offensive had failed, that all of the British Challenger tanks, the German Leopard tanks, all of the Soviet tanks that the Ukraine already had, the Bradley fighting vehicles, the Stryker fighting vehicles, the Marauders from Germany, all of those things failed to break through the Russian lines. And now he's suggested that when the M1 tanks get here, that they'll be able to break through all that stuff that they hadn't been able to before and get down to the Azov coast, which was the original plan. But then he didn't explain why that would be. And look, we have to understand the nature of the warfare, because the war has changed now. Now, when I fought in Desert Storm, it was a tank-on-tank kind of a battle, like classic thing, like all during World War II. But the days of direct fire weapons for tanks, those are, I think, things of the past. I mean, early in this war, there was, I think in April of 2022, you saw some direct fire battles that were amazingly caught on video from a drone overhead, a reconnaissance drone. And, you saw some tanks, a tank column 1 here moving down the road, and the Ukraine side was shooting it on the other side. But those things are things of the past. And there's a good reason for it, because even though drones existed prior to this, their prolific use on the battlefield had never been done this way, especially in the so-called kamikaze drones.
Russian tanks that cost over $1 million are being taken out by cheap consumer-style drones, like this one that cost a few $100s. Since the Ukrainian counteroffensive began, military analysts say there's been a dramatic increase in Ukraine's use of FPV, or first-person view, drones, with most Ukrainian battalions using these drones to execute kamikaze-style attacks on Russian tanks, troop positions, and other large-scale weapons.
Now, that was from the Ukraine side against the Russian side, but these capabilities are all over the battlefield on both sides. So the same dynamics exist from the Russian side to the Ukraine side, and therefore will exist for the M1 tank. And so when you hear that people like this vice admiral said a second ago that the M1 is going to break through and go to the coast, and somebody's got to explain how the M1 is going to be, different that when it tries to go across minefields or through lots of artillery that have been, one of the biggest battlefield strikers so far. And why is it going to not have the same effect that the others do? Now, unfortunately, for the Ukraine side or anybody in armor these days, actually, that's not the end of the story. There are 2 really big capabilities that the Russians have, which makes any kind of armor just a very, very difficult trudge and trying to break through somewhere. The first one is called the Lancet drone. That's a unique version of what the Russians have built for their direct attack drone. And it is, as you can see in the screen there, it's got a unique style to it, something that the Russians have, but it is deathly accurate. And like so much wartime innovation, they are continuing to make improvements, and they have since this war began. New versions have been showing up as recently as the last few weeks. And the Ukraine side, this is a constant give and take battle in the air, actually, where both sides are trying to use electronic warfare to mask what they're doing to either take control or at least divert the drone. The Russians have made some success in that, and now then their current Lancet drones are again being very, very effective. And it's just a nonstop battle between the two sides to try and to limit the effectiveness. And then the Russians will make changes on their guidance system to try to overcome those changes. But what we have seen very clearly is that the Lancet drones have been very, very lethal on any armor that's going in there. One of the reasons why you saw the Ukrainians change their tactics after the first several weeks of the offensive to only use infantry to try to go forward, because when they sent large numbers of armored vehicles up, they got taken out by the Lancets. The second thing that's also the very big killer of armored vehicles on the front line, and has been throughout the duration of this war, is the Ka-52, what they call alligator attack helicopter on the Russian side. And this has been one of the Achilles heel of the Ukraine side here. In addition to all of the things in the Russian defense system, with the dragon's teeth and the minefields and the tank ditches, the heavy saturation of artillery, and even the drones we have. In addition to that, they have these vehicles which have auto cannons on them, but they also have these rockets that can be fired from a great distance back. So Russia doesn't have to make its pilots vulnerable to the Ukraine side. They can fire from a great distance beyond what the tactical air defense systems that the Ukraine side has. And of course, this is a priority target for the Ukraine side, but they haven't been able to get their anti-air systems up close enough, and they've only taken out a handful of these Ka-52 helicopters, and Russia continues to build them up. Until Ukraine figures some way to stop those Ka-52s, to stop the Lancet drones, then even if they figure out a way to get through the minefields and the dragon's teeth, there's just no way that they're going to be able to send any armor through, whether the M1 or not. Now, of course, and there's a couple of other killers on the battlefield for the armor, any armor from the Ukraine side, and of course that is the anti-tank guided missiles, the shoulder fired missiles from infantry, and of course the artillery. And you put all those things together, and it just makes it nearly impossible for any armor to get through. And what I just want to reiterate here is that the M1 tank is a great piece of kit. Like I said, I was the second in command of a tank squadron in the mid-2000s in the U.S. 1st Armored Division. I know for sure what these things can do. And in the hands of the right people, they can really do some real damage. But, and this is the critical point here, the reason why the U.S. was so successful in Desert Storm in 1991, in Iraq in 2003, and all the time that I was training in that myself, is because they are employed in a combined arms operation by effective use of infantry, of armor, of artillery, engineer support, air support, attack helicopter support, electronic warfare support, and intelligence support. And all of these things are crafted into a system. It's not any one piece. It's all of it going together, all of which surround, as my mantra throughout this whole deep dive show, it's the men, not the machines. And if you have all of that technical capacity, and then you put in there trained troops, trained units, and experienced leaders at every single level, from 2 to 3 years to 5 to 12 years to 18 to 20 years, all of this experience, and you put them in an M1 tank, and there's a lot of damage they can do. But as I've been telling many people, friends of mine, that look, even if you took that American unit that was trained with all of that and all the systems, and we tried to penetrate that Russian defense system, it would be extremely difficult, and there's no guarantee we would get through it either. So this is not any kind of a ding on the Ukraine side or saying that they're not good enough to use our tanks. It's not a matter of that. They just don't, it's not even a fair fight. They just can't employ them the way we did, and no amount of training at Grafenwehr in the German training site that we've been doing, or in UK or some of these other places, no amount of training in the near term is going to replicate the system that the United States has, or the experienced leaders at every level who've done hundreds of training exercises throughout their career and then understand how to react to different situations. Ukraine side has none of that. So the idea that you're going to take, and by the way, the number up right now is 10. That's not even a full single company of tanks that's on there now. They might get the rest of the 21 by the end of the year. They're not going to make any difference on the battlefield. There's too few of them. They don't have the systems, and the Russians have the defensive capabilities that render them almost impossible to make a difference on the battlefield. If you like this video, please share it with a lot of other people, because I want to get rid of as much misinformation and disinformation as I can, and people need to know the truth on these Abrams tanks.